Hey Peter, sorry I got caught at work quite a bit later than I thought it was going to be, but I figured I'd take 15, 20 minutes and go through a couple of tips in my workflow here for how I do logo type things. So I'm just going to take something simple like a Pepsi logo here, and we'll work with this just for simplicity's sake. Let's just make sure we get a nice large image. Like to work with something that's at least like 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels most of the time. So this is nice. Already has a transparent background. Just going to copy that, and we're going to open paint.net, do a new window. I'm going to paste it in. We got a lot of dead space there, so I'm also just going to go ahead and kind of resize this down, copy it. Another new window, Control N is a new tab. So there we go. Now we got our piece that we're going to work with. And let's get started. We can X these other ones down. Don't need these open anymore. So here we go. We've got the logo. The first thing I would do is remove any of the white space or background and isolate just what we want to be printing. Then I'm going to just kind of take a look at it, and I see we got red, white, blue, and black. And the black is the outer border of it. Um, and so that's going to be our shape as well. And it's going to be like the fill for the body of most of the piece. We're only going to print the colors on the top like 4 layers, as if this was going to be like a coaster or a pin or something like that. So we'll go ahead and get started by coming down here in the bottom right. We're going to duplicate this first layer just in case we make any mistakes throughout the process. We can start over easily, and we're going to call this one shape. We're going to come back and black that out as our very last step, but we'll work with that layer to begin. Then down here on the bottom right again, we're going to click the add new layer, and we're going to add one for red, one for white, and one for blue. Come up here and double click it, and we'll name them red, white, blue. And so then now we're going to be working over here on the left side with the tools for the most part. And it's going to be these 4 different select tools, particularly the magic wand. So with the magic wand, we're going to be able to select ranges of colors based on which layer we're selected. So right now I've got the magic wand on, and I click on red, and it's going to highlight everything that's red. Alternatively, I click on black, and now it's going to select everything that's touching the black that I touched. And now if I want to add to that, I can hit Control, and I can click through each of these letters one at a time. Anything that's black that I want all highlighted here, I can select it that way. And then I would be able to copy it and paste it. And so now we have a layer that's completely isolated. Um, that's not what we want on this layer, so we'll go ahead and clear that away. Alternatively, we can come back over here. We can go to the magic wand. We'll select our first black letter. And if we want it to isolate and select everything that's black within the screen, we can hold down Shift and then click another black point, and it will use some kind of AI intelligence to calculate everything that's black. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and you can see this is a nice high resolution, sharp image. So we're getting like no bleeding outside of the letters. Just for example, I'll delete that, unhighlight it, and we have a little bit of ghosting here. So this will continue to stick on other layers. We want to try to eliminate that. So we're going to go back, undo that thing that we just deleted. And now we're going to come up here and we're going to work with the tolerance. So It's basically a sliding bar for how much black we're selecting. Um, so we can set it all the way down. It doesn't do a whole lot between the difference. Once we get up to the higher levels, it'll start selecting everything. So anything above about 80%, and it starts bringing in the transparent background above 90% or so, and it selects the entire image. So depending on the resolution of your image and how complex the coloring and the image itself is, I usually use between like 40 and 60%. Because this is a real crisp, high definition image, I'm going to use 65%. It also has to do with the contrast between the colors. We have white separating everything here. So we're going to get nice, clean selections. If you had two similar colors, like a pink and a red, you're really going to have to play with this tolerance to figure out where that cutoff is for what the computer sees between the two colors. And so as you slide that back and forth, you'll be able to see, especially if they're similar colors. So we're going to go ahead and go through the process of copying and pasting each of the colors into layers. So what I'm doing here is I'm making sure the entire canvas or the entire artboard is within the window. And that way, when I switch between the different layers here on the right side, as I'm pasting them into their respective layers, they're going to paste in at the same orientation that I copied them. If I was zoomed in on an image, if I was zoomed in like this, and I tried to paste them in, there's going to be variation between each layer, and that's going to lead you to have to do more alignment work inside of the slicer itself. So zoom out so that you have a border around what your piece that you're working is. So I'm going to come over here, make sure I got the magic wand selected. I'm going to leave it at 55. It's probably fine. I hit red to start. I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to come over to the layers. I'm going to select the one I named red. I'm going to paste it, and you'll see that it appeared in the layer itself. So now I've got the red layer finished, essentially. I'm going to come back down here and I'm going to do the blue layer. So just, I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to select the magic wand. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click on the blue and do the same thing. Control C. Yeah, it's got to be Control C. There's no right click here. We're going to come back up to the blue layer now on the right side. We're going to Control V to paste it in. And now you can see we've got the upper and bottom portion, lower portion of the Pepsi logo. So once again, we'll come back down to the shape layer. We're going to go back over to the magic wand. And now we're going to go and select all of the white. So we've got all of that. I'm going to just do the control method here. I'm going to control select another white area. And while holding control down, I'm going to select another white area. Now that I have them all, I'm going to go ahead and copy it with Control C. I'm going to switch back over to the white layer and I'm going to paste it. Now, when we save these as JPEGs, they're going to save with a white background, not a transparent background. And when we load them into the STL converter, white is not going to be recognized. It's only going to pick up the colors essentially. So for the white, right away, we're going to go ahead and we're going to change that layer to its inverse color. So I'm going to unclick all of the other layers just so that we can see it in action. I'm going to deselect everything. Control D can be used to deselect, or you can click different places on the screen. But for this white layer, we now have that selected, and we're going to go to adjustments, and we're going to do invert colors. Also can be done with Control Shift I, and that's going to change any light color on that layer to a dark color. It's inverse, so white becomes black. And that's why we labeled them over here, because we're going to bring that name into the nomenclature for the file so that when we're working with them in STLs and then bring them into Bamboo Studio, it's easy to recognize which color each layer is supposed to be and quickly assign them in Bamboo Studios. So what we now have is the Pepsi logo. The three colors have been done. I'm going to deselect those. Now we're just working with the shape layer here. And so now everything that's not in these three layers is going to end up being filled in with black, and then we'll have this small black border on the outside. So in order to get the perfect circle shape, we're just simply going to fill it in with black. And that wasn't black. We'll make sure we have black selected down here in our color palette. We're going to use the paint bucket tool. We're just going to come ahead and fill all these spots in. And we'll give it one more click for good measure to make sure that it gets any areas inside of the circle between what we just paint bucketed. So now we've got the shape, and we can go ahead and name that black as well, because that's what our base color is going to be. And now we're ready to begin saving. So I'm going to begin by saving the image itself as a paint.net file. And I'll put it on the desktop. We're going to create a new folder called Pepsi logo. And inside of it, we're going to name this Pepsi logo as well. So now we've got it saved as a paint.net file, which saves it with all the layer data. I selected the background so that, when you're looking through it in a big folder, you see it with the appropriate colors and not the inverse colors and the things we did to prepare it for becoming an STL. So now we're just going to go ahead and we're going to save each one of these, and we're going to save them as a JPEG. So we're going to go save as. We're going to come down here, change it to JPEG. We're going to do logo, and we're going to do red. It's telling us that it wants to know if we want to compress it. I leave it at 100%. It's going to flatten it to remove all of the things besides just the one that we had checked to enable that layer. So now this has been saved, Pepsi logo -red. I'm going to do Control Z, which is undo, or you can use the undo arrows up here. And that's going to back us up that last step where we flattened it. And now I can go ahead and unselect the red layer. I'm going to select the white layer, which it appears black because we did the inverse colors. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to save as. I'm going to change it to JPEG. But this time we're going to call it white because it's the white layer. Same thing. We're going to save it with no compression, and we're going to flatten it. Second layer saved. We're going to Control Z to go back and re-expose our layers. And now we're going to deselect the white, select the blue. And we'll do the same save as process one more time. So we'll change that to blue. We're going to change the type to JPEG. It's important to do JPEG because I'm going to use a JPEG to STL converter. If you have a different type of converter that you like to use, just make sure you save it to the respective file extension. So we've got that. And the final one is going to be our base shape, and that's going to be black. So we're going to save that as. We're going to save that as a JPEG, and we'll do black this time. And yes, we'll flatten it. We're going to go back. And so now we're done in paint.net for the moment. Hopefully we don't have to come back and do any cleanup, but you never know. And so we're going to go use this JPEG to STL converter, AnyConvert or AnyConv. So we're able to drag and drop our files or choose our files. So we've got these in desktop, Pepsi logo. And we're going to select the 4 JPEGs that we saved. And now we've got the JPEG. We're going to have all these different file formats that we can save them to. STL has always worked pretty well for me, so I don't have any reason to stray, but I'm sure there's other flavors in here that would also be acceptable for Bamboo Studio or your choice of slicing program. So it's going to take a minute here to convert, and while it does that, I got something on the printer. I'm just going to step away for a moment and change plates here. And we'll let these things finish downloading. All right, looks like they're done. I'm just gonna throw a new plate in here and we'll pick right back up. Print again, close, disable this, print now. All right, so we can download all 4 of these files now by just clicking download STL. First time you click it, it always pops up an ad. You exit down and then you don't get an ad as long as your session stays active. So we've got all 4 of these downloading. 1, 2, 3, 4 are done. I'm gonna go open up a new instance of Bamboo Studio and we're gonna bring those STLs in. We'll just create a new project. We're gonna go and we're going to find our downloads folder with those STLs downloaded. And we're gonna select all 4 of them together and then hit open. All right, it's asking if we want to scale it. I always say yes to all of these. And then this is the important one. It's object was detected with multiple parts. Do we want to load this as an object with multiple parts? And for now, we absolutely do. So I'm going to hit yes. And this was nice and easy. It brought them all in and oriented them together. We can see up here if we hit scale, this is going to be real important for your application potentially. If you have real small areas in your STL compared to the scale of the entire image that you were working with inside of paint.net, sometimes these are the scales will be messed up between each of the objects. And you're going to have 1 or 2 of the STLs that are blown up to like 100 or 200 millimeters in height. And it'll become real apparent as soon as you see it. But what you're going to want to do if that happens is you want to click on objects. And you're going to click through. These are the 4 files that we loaded in. And you're going to want to click through each of those objects until you see which one of them is scaled goofy like that. And then while making sure you have uniform scale turned on, you just hit the Z height to be 5.08 millimeters. Why it's 5.08, I'm not really sure, but everything that I run through that free STL converting website has 5.08 millimeters as its like default height. So that's a way that I found to always scale them in all 3 dimensions back to their respective dimensions. So here it looks like we got a solid object because everything came in red. But we can now take the objects and you can see as we highlight through them that each one is selecting its respective area. And because we named them, we can now go back and color them. So there's 2 ways to do this. You can like click a whole bunch of times on the number and then it'll come a drop down and you can change the color that way. And now you'll see we have Pepsi appear, or the way I like to do it is if you're clicked on a layer, or on an object, I'm sorry, if you're clicked on it, you can use the number keys on your keyboard as hotkeys. And so you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are the numbers assigned to the colors. I'm going to come over on the white, hit 3, red's already good. I don't have a blue, so I'm going to add a blue to my color wheel, or to my filament selection. I'm going to go down to blue, I'm going to hit 2, I'm going to go to black, and I'm going to hit 5. And so now I should hopefully have all the colors. Yep, and there you can see the blue pops back. So right now, this goes through the entire image. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take everything but our base color, the outline color, what the body of it's going to be. So that's going to be black in this case. And we're going to take the other 3 layers, or the other 3 objects, and we're going to scale those. But we only want to do it in the Z height. We want to leave the X and the Y in the same aspect ratio. So we're going to unselect uniform scale, and we're going to change this to a height respective of the number of layers that we want the color to appear. So if we want to appear in 3 layers and we're printing a 0.4 millimeter nozzle at 0.2 millimeter layer height, we would want 0.6 millimeters to equal 3 layers. If we wanted 4, we could do 0.8. Anything above that, it's most likely unnecessary. Unless you have very light colors on a very dark background, you could experience some bleed. But then what I would typically do is come back with 1 more additional STL in a slightly smaller circle, and I would put a couple layers of white between the colors and the darker body color. But for this one, we're just going to print it like this. We're going to do 4 layers at 0.2 millimeters, so 2 millimeter layer heights. That's going to be 0.8 millimeters of color that we need. We're going to go ahead and hit enter to resize that. And so now it resizes it from the center point. It's kind of buried in the middle of this, what looks like a hockey puck now. So what we're going to do is make sure we have it set at the orientation that we want it at. And we're now going to flip this 180 degrees. We're going to print it face down on a textured PEI plate, and that way it's going to minimize the actual layer lines inside that top layer itself. The PEI plate does a really, really good job of hiding any imperfections as well, and taking away kind of that, I don't know, the 3D printed look that you get with top layers. And so it also, reduces or eliminates completely the need for ironing, which is an extremely time-consuming process if that's something that you've done in the past. So now to make sure that we have everything dropped down to the build plate level instead of being stuck in the center of the piece, we're going to go here to our assembly. We're going to right click, and then we're going to split it into objects. What that did was it just separated our assembly back into objects, and it snapped everything to the build plate level, but it left its orientation in X and Y the same. And now we can right click without clicking anywhere else, so that those 4 parts are still highlighted, and we're going to go ahead and reassemble it. And that is the last step. So we can come up here to slice plate now. We're going to go down and we're going to see, there's nothing there. For one, we're still at a very small size here. We're at under 1 inch for this. So I'm going to go ahead and make this, we'll make it 95 millimeters by 95 millimeters for the entire assembly. Now let's slice the plate again and let's see if we get colors. So we got nothing. So now what we're going to need to do is we're going to go back to prepare. And this happens for a whole bunch of unknown reasons. And if you do one object and then clone it, sometimes you may have to come back here and set these again. But what we're going to do is we're going to take our 3 layers that are not our body and we're going to assign them to a different type of part. So right now we're just using a normal part and we're going to change the type to a modifier. And so I'm going to right click on the layer. I'm going to go to change type. That's currently a part and I'm going to change it to modifier. And what modifier does is it essentially forces it to print inside the body of the piece itself. And there's probably better ways to do this, but I found it's relatively quick and relatively consistent. So once I found something that works, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So there we go. Now we have all of our colors and our layers. And that would be our piece and our logo. And if we wanted to do alternate colors or goofy things instead of painting now, we have complete control over each one of these bodies of colors or objects of color. So there we kind of have it. Hit a couple of settings here that I normally do. Initial layer, it normally is set to 0.5. I normally change it down to 0.4. You can go as low as like 0.35, 0.32 before you start having real issues. So if you're having problems as you're printing smaller and smaller objects, you can change the width of the lines to allow for a better infill or better fill of objects. Seam position is always important. I'm not a huge fan of the over extrusion every time it puts down a seam. So I don't like random in a round object like this. So I'm going to align the seam somewhere. All that stuff I leave. I don't do ironing. This is a setting that's very important. I always switch it off of the classical wall generator anytime I'm doing any logos or any kind of shapes that have any kind of geometry to them. What this also allows you to do is for those inner layers, like the lettering in Pepsi, if you had issues getting walls to show up still at the size you're trying to print, you can start playing with some of the factors on the side here, like minimum wall width. So if it's not printing something, you can reduce what the minimum threshold is for the slicer to recognize that. These, I would say, are last resort or very advanced settings. Things can get kind of goofy and what seems kind of like out of control within the slicer with a few settings, just a few clicks in the settings here. And then the other one here, I always do make sure that the top surface only has one wall, and only one wall on the first layer is also very important when printing color down. Otherwise, you get kind of an embossed effect, especially depending on the number of walls that your piece is going to have. If it has 3 or 4, you can actually make a logo look like it's a patch then. And so obviously there's some design advantages to things like that, but again, probably a more advanced lesson number 2 type of thing. Bottom, I usually keep it at 3 or 4 layers. Top, always at least 5. I hate seeing, I hate having to throw away a piece because you don't get good top fill and you got splotches or patches because you didn't have enough top layers. And then infill and infill density. I like rectangular because it's relatively fast. It prints the entire pattern on each layer so that there's no intersecting lines. Unfortunately, grid is the default. So if you're printing with that, it's probably one of the most problematic features, default features within the slicer, in my opinion, and the reason for a lot of people's failed prints, because the lines in each layer have to cross over themselves in a grid pattern where it gets its name from. Typically, that's not a big deal, and it even adds additional strength. But when you intersect the lines, you have to remelt the plastic in the line that you're crossing over. And at the speed that these bamboos move, I think a lot of people are finding that it's skipping over the lines and it's not melting into them. So you're losing the adhesion between them, and you're also gaining Z height, and it often will knock the piece off of the build plate the taller it gets. Gyrite is always a really good safe bet as well. Don't really do much for speed. I'll do 50 for the initial first layer and like 75 for the initial fill. Slower is better for that first layer because that's what you're going to see. Everything else behind the piece doesn't really matter. The first layer is essentially the only thing that's important here. Don't need supports, any of that stuff. Don't need prime towers, or prime towers are default, but don't need I'm going to switch this back to traditional. Smooth causes you to have a prime tower for the entire piece. So if the camera's out of the way in the time lapse, traditional just snaps it on the go. And so I think I would probably print like this. I guess the last thing I always do, I have print profiles already set up for all of my filaments. But since one of the last updates I installed, and I'm not currently up to date on the software, so they may have changed this in a future release, but they turn the auxiliary fans for PLA up to like 70%, and it causes horrible warping issues on the left side of all of my build plates for like 30 millimeters into the build plate. So what I'm going to always do for each of the filaments I'm using is I'm going to click the little edit, bring up the cooling tab, and I'm going to change the fan speed for auxiliary part cooling to 20 or 25%. You could honestly turn it off, because if you're printing PLA, you should have your chamber vented anyways, so it should be vented to atmosphere. This serves absolutely no purpose, in my opinion. I think it's a coding mistake. Hopefully it is fixed, but I would do that. It also quiets the whole process down quite a bit and will increase your likelihood of successful prints. So with all of that said, I'm sure I probably went over the 10 or 15 minutes I was thinking it was going to take, but there it is. A little more complicated than just painting it in, but once you get a handful of these kind of under your belt, it becomes really easy, especially super complex things. If you, like you said, have some experience within paint.net itself, you can do a lot of the fixing up to improve printability before you even turn it into an STL. So you can, delete areas or fix areas that are too steep of curves, or there's not enough room between intersecting lines to get multiple colors or something like that. A lot of the work, and you'll see it reflected in the quality as you print a few of these out. And you're like, oh, I wish those letters would be filled in a little bit more, or there's a little bit of spacing between the black and the red in the logo. And a lot of that can easily be adjusted back here inside of the paint.net and the JPEG. So there you have it. Hopefully I did an okay job and didn't kind of just dump on you, but that's kind of my process, and it's been working well I've been doing it this way for 5 or 6 years. Before Bamboo, I was doing multi-extruder and manual color changes by just editing the G code for whatever color changes you need and whatnot. But yeah, feel free to shoot over any questions, and I wish you luck, man.